Annalyn, right on cue. Thank you. So a little bit about me. I've been with the Clean Buildings team for a few years, mostly focusing on appliance standards. I recently transitioned into the Tier 1 Early Adopter Incentives Program lead and took over launching the Energy Audit Incentive Program. Before me, my predecessor, Annika McDonald, was running the Tier 1 incentive program, so she is still around, but she recently got a promotion. So if you're familiar with the Tier 1 work, that is my wonderful predecessor. And we are going to be focusing mainly on Tier 1 incentives today. And at the end of this, we'll talk about some stuff around Tier 2 buildings. So next slide, please. Okay, so for those of you that are not familiar with Commerce, we're a really unique state entity. We have a very comprehensive breadth of work and really focus on strengthening communities and improving the lives of all the Washingtonians that we serve. Next slide. A little smaller view. So this is the team focused on the clean buildings work. Obviously, we have at the top our fearless leader, Emily Salzberg. And then the team mostly running this show today is the incentive program. We've got two new members, Josette. I don't know if she's on camera. She wants to give a little wave. She's leading the incentive program. And then Derek Cockle is running the Tier 2 incentive program. And as I stated, I'm working on Tier 1 work and the audit incentives. And then, of course, we have Paul as one of the specialists on the team as well. Next slide. Okay, so for today's agenda, we're going to do a brief overview of the Clean Buildings Performance Standard just to kind of get the lay of the land for context. Then we'll do a little refresher on the Tier 1 Early Adopter Incentive Program, a little bit of background, and then we'll go into the enhancements that are coming about from House Bill 1976. And really hoping to get your feedback on that. As Annalyn mentioned, we'll have some polls throughout to get a little bit of feedback live during this workshop. Then we'll talk about the audit incentive program for public buildings, and along with that, the corresponding qualified energy auditor list. And then we'll hopefully have some time for questions and answers. Feel free to put your questions in the chat during the presentation, and then we'll address those at the end. Derek has promised to keep track of those, so we'll leave some time at the end to talk about that. And then the upcoming events that the incentive program is going to be hosting. And after today's presentation, we will send out these slides and the recording and any questions that we didn't get to. Go ahead. Thank you. So first up, overview of the Clean Building Performance Standard. I think Derek should be inserting a link to the Clean Buildings page just for all of the amazing resources on there. But for some context, the Clean Buildings Law was authorized in House Bill 1257 in the 2019 legislative session. It is based on ASHRAE Standard 100, which covers the energy efficiency in existing buildings. Commerce has developed amendments to Standard 100 to conform with the Clean Buildings legislation, and those amendments can be found under WAC 194-50. And you can also find the integrated document to Standard 100 on our website. I think he should be posting that link. So Tier 1 buildings are buildings over 50,000 square feet, excluding parking areas, and Tier 2 buildings are between 20 and 50 square feet, and multifamily over 20,000 square feet. So why is Commerce involved? In that legislation, Commerce was charged with rulemaking, notifying the building owners, administering these incentives that we're going to be talking about today, as well as supporting mandatory compliance. Next slide. So just some basic requirements for Tier 1 buildings. They need to benchmark their building, implement an operations and maintenance program, an energy management plan, comply with an energy performance metric. So they can do this either by meeting the energy use intensity target or investment criteria. And we have a wealth of resources on that clean buildings page that goes into a deeper dive on tier 1 and tier 2 buildings. So just a brief overview. For tier 2 buildings, it's a little bit of a shorter list. Those are those smaller cohort of buildings between 20 and 50,000 square feet. And they need to benchmark their building, implement an operation and maintenance program and energy management plan, but they do not have that last piece of being required to meet a performance standard at this time. Okay, so timeline for our reporting schedule. So those largest tier 1 buildings larger than 220,000 square feet are going to be, their compliance deadline is June 1st of 2026. The next cohort of tier 1 buildings, which are between 90 and 220 square feet, is going to be June 1st of 2027. And then the tier 2 buildings come into compliance in July 1st of 2027. And we should have made it June, but I know that's a little tricky. And then tier 1, that smallest cohort of 50 to 90,000 square feet, is going to be June 1st of 2028. So just a nice visual to show where your building might fall in that chronology. Next slide, thank you. So now we will get into tier 1 early adopter incentives. Next slide, thank you. So originally, this program was authorized in that 2019 bill. We got the program up and running in July of 2021, and the purpose of it was to encourage the early adoption of the Clean Buildings Performance Standard for Tier 1 buildings before that mandatory compliance deadline. So originally, the incentive amount was capped at 85 cents per square foot of gross floor area, and it's paid to the buildings by their utility service provider. We're going to be going into how we can increase that, and what I really want to elicit y'all's feedback on structuring how to increase that payment amount. So please, and we encourage you to be involved in those polls that we're going to be populating in the coming slides. The original pot of money was $75 million, and that comes from public utility taxes. The program ends 1 year prior to each of these cohorts' compliance dates. So for those really large buildings, it's going to be June 1st of next year. And then the 90 to 220, it's going to be June 1st of 2026. And then for the smallest buildings in tier 1, it's going to be June 1st of 2027. So some eligibility markers for that tier 1 incentive program. It needs to be obviously a tier 1 building, so over 50,000 square feet. Multifamily buildings are able to apply for incentives, but they're unique in tier 1 buildings and they do not need to comply with the standard. The energy use intensity needs to be 15 kBTU over the target, and they have to have at least one electric, gas, or thermal energy company participating in the incentive program. And then, of course, at the end, they need to have the ability to meet the building's energy use intensity target. So this slide is hopefully going to help reiterate how important it is to get started now for the early adopter incentive program. It's a pretty long process, and to get started, you need to apply. The building needs to submit 12 months of Energy Start portfolio data as part of their application. And then Commerce will review their application and calculate the potential incentive amount. Once that is approved, we'll send it off to the utility providing services to the building and get that estimated incentive amount approved. From there, the building owner will go ahead and implement those measures, and they have 18 months for construction. If necessary, 12 additional months can be requested. And then from there, once all of the construction and measures are implemented, we'll need an additional we want you to allow for 18 months for measure and verification so that we can ensure we get 12 consecutive months of data verifying that that building now meets or exceeds the energy use intensity target. So a little example at the bottom, we're going to go into some more examples, but for some simple math, at the rate right now, if you had a 100,000 square foot building at the 85 cents per square foot rate, you would be incentivized to at $85,000. Go to the next slide. And Derek, I'll have you insert a link if you don't mind. This is just a little screenshot of the incentive program webpage. There is a ton of resources on there, especially that little thumbnail of the guidebook that goes into a lot of detail about how you can apply to the incentive application and program. So now that we've talked about the Tier 1 program, let's talk about how we can enhance it and see how we can get more dollars out there from that 85 cents. So a little bit of background. As I mentioned, the program launched in 2021. We did a lot of outreach and we are still continuing to do that right now. But to date, we have 7 approved applications, and that is reserving just under $1.5 million. So we still have quite a large portion of the 75 million available. Earlier this year, we just got House Bill 1976 approved, and that legislation was proposed to increase the amount to shoulder more of this cost and make the incentive application more appealing to applicants by complying with their EUIT. Because as we talked about, it is a very long process, and we really want to incentivize folks to be part of this program and meet their EUIT. So we do have the authority to increase the amount, and today we're really hoping that we can show you some examples and get your feedback on how much to increase the amount. Again, today we're only focusing on the Tier 1 enhanced incentives, but starting next month, Derek is going to be hosting some Tier 2 incentive program workshops. Oh, here's our second poll. Jeff's gonna have it pop up for you, but the questions are, what are the obstacles that prevent you from applying to the Tier 1 incentive program? And what kinds of support do you need from us? So we would love it if you answer right now. We are gonna also have these go out in a survey to give you a little more time to think about it and maybe a little open box for that other, but really trying to get to the root of how we can get more applicants. So it looks like a big one is just in this preliminary reading is the upfront cost and funding, confusing application, some staffing problems, and then support for us, the application support and technical assistance. Okay. We'll give that just another minute to let folks answer. It looks like about half of you have participated so far, so thank you all. Okay, so the overall for question 1 seems to be funding. So whether that's upfront cost or the audit. And then for question 2, not as big of a fluctuation in answers, but application support seems to be a big one, followed right behind it with technical assistance. So thank you guys for answering that. And if you didn't get a chance to, we'll send out a survey as well. But I will say one of the, sorry to make you go back. One of the things that we did hear about for the difficulties to access was that audit costs. So later in the presentation, we're going to go into the audit incentive program for public buildings, and hopefully that can help get some more folks into this program. Okay, so how should we prioritize funding? So these are just some recommendations that we've come up with, and I think we'll have a poll a little bit later on this, but just an overview. So should we give funding prioritization to the first group of buildings? Should we have a higher incentive amount for rural communities or underserved communities? Should we enhance high energy users funding amounts? Should we give more funding prioritization to multifamily and affordable housing? And how should we structure that incentive payment? Should we do it solely based off of the enhanced amount above the 85 cents? Should we just do a calculation for energy saved? Should we, bump up everything from 85 cents to like a flat, $3 or so? Should the rate be increased based on your compliance date? Like those really big buildings that are coming up on compliance in 2 short years. So in the next few slides, we're going to give some examples on the potential to explore some of these options. Next slide, thank you. Okay, so example 1, we did get these from the portal. We took out some of the information just to make it a little bit more generic, but this is an approved application. So it's a college. It is 65,000 square feet. The weather normalized energy use intensity is 161, and their target is 112. Their overall project cost is estimated at $1 million, just over $1 million. At the current 85-cent rate, their incentive calculation is just over 55,000. So, for example, if we were to increase that just to $1, it's already another 10 grand. If we were to jump up to $3, that's almost $200,000. That's a significant jump for that increase. Next example. Okay, so another example, this one is a healthcare facility. So this one is 84,000 square feet with a normalized, that word is killing me, weather normalized energy use intensity of 288, and the target is 215. So these are in the higher range. Obviously, it's a healthcare facility. Their project cost to get it to their target is $2.9 million. At the current rate, the incentive is $71,000. So if we were to, jump up to that $3 increased flat rate, it could be $250,000, which it is a much larger number than that 71,000. Obviously, we realized it's still very far off from the 2.9 million. But we have to balance this enhanced incentive with the fact that, there are thousands of buildings in this state that could potentially apply for this. So we need a balance of not putting all of our eggs in one basket. We want to, be able to give as many people as much funding as possible. So just balancing that amount with what is realistic for the group as a whole. So, for example, if we were to increase it to a flat rate of $3 for everybody for buildings that are, say, 250,000 square feet, we could do 100 buildings. They would each get, $750,000. Obviously, that's not the only people that are going to apply to it, but just for numbers' sake. If we were to do that flat rate for buildings in that second cohort that are 150,000 square feet, we could do about 166 buildings, and they would each receive $450,000. And then for that smallest cohort of 50,000 square feet buildings, if we were to increase that incentive to $3, we could do 500 buildings, and they would each be getting about $150,000. So the next slide, we're going to go into another potential enhancement, and I just want you to keep that flat rate in the back of your mind. And I'm going to hand it over to Josette for this slide.
Thanks, Brittany. I hope everyone's doing great today. Let's look at what the incentive, paying out the incentive would look like based on what energy savings are going to be achieved with the project. So this slide illustrates the difference between paying paying the incentive as a flat rate per square footage of the building, and then paying it as an incentive based on the amount of energy that the project saves. So many utilities already offer incentives based on energy savings, so it's not really a new concept. Here in this example, we're looking at 3 different building types. The first one's an event center, a hospital, and a college. Of the 3 buildings, the event center benefits the most from the flat rate payment based on the 85 cents a square foot. So you can see that in the blue section of this chart. You can see though, in the example of the hospital, which is the second bar on this chart, they would get much more incentive payments if we base the payment based on a 5 cents per kBTU saved over the 15 EUI. So hospitals are bigger buildings, they have a higher energy intensity. We go to the hospitals 24 hours a day. They need to be air conditioned and they have lots of different processes. So this type of scheme where we're paying out the incentive based on energy savings kind of takes in those consideration of the special use cases, as you can see on this slide. The third case here is a college building that was in our program, and you can see they benefit a little bit more also from the scheme where we would pay the incentive out based on the energy saved. I hope this kind of helps illustrate the difference there, and I'll turn it back over to Brittany.
Thank you. Before we jump from this slide, I hope this kind of shows the difference between if we were just to increase the overall flat rate and then, you know, versus if we were to just enhance the incentives based off of energy targets. I mean, maybe the answer is some sort of hybrid between the two. Maybe it's, you know, increasing it to $2 and also additionally doing an energy saved calculation. I see a lot of folks in the chat. I don't want to get too distracted by it, but yes, you know, these programs can be coupled with other utility programs. So it's important to keep that in mind. Okay, we can go to the next one. Thank you. And here we go. It's your time to shine. So we'll have another poll pop up from the wonderful Jeff. So who should we prioritize? And what proposed tier 1 incentive enhancement would encourage you to apply? You specifically. You can, I mean, you can answer generically, but we really want to know what would encourage you to apply. All right, so we've got high energy users popping up. That seems the same for the enhancement. Also getting some flat rate. Thanks to everybody participating. All right. High energy users are here in strength today.
The survey that's going to be sent out, it's going to have an option for entering just an open-ended, you know, answers. So you could write in other suggestions, but for the sake of this poll and time, we kind of limited the options.
Thank you. We'll give it just another second for you guys to be able to participate. But really start thinking about this, and we look forward to having your feedback, whether it's now or in that survey going out.
Okay, would you like me to end the poll?
Yes, please.
Let me share.
Awesome. So we're getting good participation. It seems like the overall answer for number 1 for prioritization is those high energy users. That was about 61% of you said that, followed by under-resourced communities. And then for question 2, the proposed enhancement, about 47% said Josette's example of the 85 cents plus paying per savings, and then second was flat rate. And I realized we did not have that, you know, hybrid answer that I mentioned. So maybe in the survey, we'll we'll hear more about your thoughts on that. Next slide, please. All right, so now we'll go into the energy audit incentive program for public buildings. And Derek hopefully will post in the chat a link to the Box account that goes into a little bit more detail about this program. But essentially, we received $20 million from the Climate Commitment Act account in proviso funding from Senate Bill 5187. We launched this program posting an RFA in late February, announcing this funding opportunity. And the intent is that the funding will cover part or all of the cost of a level 2 audit for publicly owned buildings at a rate of 50 cents per square foot, and traditionally, excluding those parking areas. So enhanced payment is available for this program as well. And that is for buildings greater than 220,000 square feet, as well as those buildings in rural communities. A really great thing about this program is, it doesn't only accept audits that have started since its launch in February. We're retroactively paying for those energy audits all the way back to July of 2023. And the program ends in July 30th of next year in 2025. So extending that open period, and again, $20 million available. And I think that's it for that one. Next slide, please. Okay, so this beautiful graphic Hannah Lynn made. We just kind of wanted to paint a picture of how these programs are interconnected that we're talking about today. So you'll see on the bottom starting point is that energy audit for public buildings. And, that program can hopefully pay for that ASHRAE level 2 audit, which could then push you into the tier 1 incentive program since you've already gotten that audit knocked out. And then that will set you on your pathway to the Clean Buildings Performance Standard and compliance. So an ASHRAE Level 2 energy audit is a recommended analysis in order to obtain early adopter incentive funding. And it's also a requirement if you are going for that compliance pathway of the investment criteria. And, the reason that this energy audit for public buildings program was launched is a lot of public building owners can be limited for financial access due to upfront costs of the energy audit. So the whole reason this program exists is because we were receiving feedback from building owners that the cost, as some of you mentioned in today's call, are really holding them back from the incentive program. So we're hoping that this can be a stepping stone, to get people to springboard into that early adopter incentive program. They do not have to go together, but ideally, we want to help out as much as possible. We want to get people to that compliance. So to comply with the standard, you can start anywhere along this process. These are just some of the incentive stepping stones that we're offering. Next slide. So a little more about the energy audit. For this program, it must be performed by a qualified energy auditor from the verified list. And we'll go into a little more detail about the auditor details, but they need to be a qualified energy auditor listed on our approved list or the DES ESCO list. So again, we'll talk about that in a couple slides, but these audits are looking at, your building's lighting, HVAC equipment, building envelope, and just the building's overall systems. So they can be a really helpful safety tool as well to identify things going on in your building, not just energy efficiency. Next slide. So for the energy audit for publicly owned buildings, I want to just keep reiterating. So we all know that this is for public buildings. The requirement or the qualifications are, it needs to be a public tier 1 building greater than 50,000 square feet. The applicant needs to be licensed to do building in Washington or submit a statement of commitment. They need to be in good standing with Commerce and all applicable laws and requirements. And then as far as the project goes, it needs to be an existing building in Washington. They need to benchmark the building using Energy Star Portfolio Manager. And they also need to complete Form D in accordance with the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. As we kind of touched on, they need to hire an energy auditor from the Approved Commerce Network or that DES list. And the audit needs to be completed by June 15th of 2025. This is just a little visual of what the application requirements look like. So this is in order to apply to the program with Commerce. So there's 4 exhibits that need to be submitted to us. In the certifications and assurances is essentially just a checkbox with a signature. And then the application goes into a little more detail about the building and the building owner and who the auditor will be. We also ask for the diverse business plan and the workers' rights certifications. And Derek, if you don't mind popping in the chat the box account that goes into more detail about this. Next slide. Okay, so just a little visual of how you can get started. So go into that box account, review the RFA documents and requirements. And if you meet those qualifications, then you would submit the application and required certifications and assurances to us. And then we would draft an interagency agreement or contract with Commerce to get that project funded. Next slide. So there's a couple different dates that gets a little bit confusing in the energy audit program. So I really wanted to just hammer home what is what. So the applications for the energy audits for public buildings need to be submitted to Commerce by April 30th. That's just the application. The actual audit needs to be completed by a couple weeks later, by June 15th of 2025. And then by June 30th, we need to receive all invoices for all expenses for the whole contract so that we can ensure that those get processed on our end. So hopefully that helps. Those dates in the RFA get a little bit confusing. Okay, so now we'll go into what consists of the Verified Energy Auditor Network list. I know it's a mouthful. It's the best I can do. So for that energy auditor list, the purpose of this grant, and it is there's no dollar amount attached to it. It's just a list that we're compiling. But for this grant was to create a qualified energy auditor list that publicly owned buildings can use. And public buildings include those owned by the state, local governments, tribes, and school districts. So this was posted as an RFQQ, and we launched it at the same time as that last program we were talking about, the RFA, in late February. So once the credentials and all that are sent into us, we have a panel that is going to be and has already reviewed some of the auditor credentials and ensuring that they are able to complete an investment grade audit for that public owned buildings program. Next slide. Okay, so some of the minimum qualifications: they need to be licensed to do business in Washington or submit that statement of commitment. They need to have 3 years of professional experience in building energy auditing, and they need to be a qualified energy auditor. And on the next slide, I'll go into what that means. So qualified energy auditor by this standard is a person acting as the auditor of record, having training expertise and 3 years of professional experience in the building energy auditing and any one of the following. So they can be a licensed professional architect or engineer, have their BEEP certification through ASHRAE, they can have their CEA through AEE, so many acronyms, or they can have their CEM through AEE. We are currently updating this standard. So once we get that done, we'll have that language go out in the RFQQ. But right now we just have these certifications. So you would submit those as part of your application to us to get on that qualified auditor list. Next slide. Okay, so this is just a visual. We are creating our own list. If you're already on this one, it'll be a little bit faster of a process because your credentials have already been vetted by DES. So we didn't want to make you, do the same thing twice. So if you're already on the DES ESCO list, that qualifies as checking your credentials, and that you could just say I'm on the DES list, and that would prove your credentials as part of your application. Okay, so that concludes the presentation part of the workshop, and we're gonna open it up for questions in just a second. I hope Derek has been keeping track of the chat. And if we don't get your question answered today, because I see that the chat has been very active, we will do a follow-up. And before I hand it off to Derek, some of the next steps after this webinar, we're going to send out that poll as in the form of a survey. We are going to send out these slides and the recording, and then we're going to work internally to get whatever feedback we got from this presentation as well as that survey, and work internally, and hopefully by June next month, we'll be able to come up with an enhanced incentive pay structure and get that published. So make sure you're on our mailing list, and we'll also announce it at the first Tier 2 workshop. So I'll leave it open for questions, and then we'll talk about some upcoming events next. But again, if we don't get your question answered today, we will jot it down and get it answered in that follow-up email. Derek, you have the floor.
Thank you, Brittany. Yeah, we have quite a few questions. So I'll start with one that just came in real quick and then get to the top. When do we expect to post the recording and the slides?
Anna Lynn, do you know how fast we are these days?
Posting it on the website, it takes time because we aren't the webmasters of it. So that may take time. The soonest you'll get it, you'll see it in the bulletin. You'll see it in an email because you registered. So you'll either get it by the end of this week or early next week.
Thank you. So back at the top, first question, is the RFQQ still accepting rolling applications? The links to the box on the website are broken.
Yeah, so both programs are till June of 2025. We did have some complaints about the links being broken, but as of an hour before this webinar, I tried them and they worked. So do you mind trying again and seeing, or was that like from this webinar you checked?
It was from this webinar, yeah.
Ooh, okay. Yeah, we'll get that figured out, and you can also shoot me an email or the direct box.
We'll send the links out with the follow-up email with the recording and all that stuff, so that at least that will give you access to it. But we will ensure that the website gets updated. Thank you.
Question number 2, what does the timeline look like for multifamily programs?
I guess as far as what, like for Tier 1 or Tier 2?
This was in regards to the incentive application process. So if they are to apply to that Tier 1 incentive, since you mentioned that multifamily greater than 50,000 is able to apply, I was looking for something similar to that nice arrow timeline outlining the 2-year process to receiving that incentive.
Yeah, let me check back in with Annika because I'm not as familiar. I am newer to the program.
Here. Yeah, I'm here.
Perfect. So is there going to be anything different other than, yeah, I'll let you take the floor.
Sure. So if you're a multifamily looking to apply to the Tier 1 incentive program, the application window would close based on your building size. So if you're within like a multifamily that's 220,000 square feet and greater, it would end June 1st of 2025, and then it would stagger from that point. So the application window is open for multifamily, but they're not required, as Brittany mentioned, it's not mandatory for multifamily for Tier 1. But those windows of application would close based on the size of the building and the different cohorts of compliance. It would close 1 year before the compliance. Does that answer your question?
Yes, in some ways. Mostly I was trying to gauge whether in this case they still would have to be 15 EUI above the target, but they would not be working to meet those energy efficiency measures since that's not a requirement for Tier 2.
No, so the building, in order to qualify, I'm getting what you're saying, I'm sorry. So the building would need to be, have an energy use intensity that is 15 above its applicable target. It would have to implement the performance standard requirements for meeting the target in order to receive the incentive. So you would have to go through the process of installing the measures to reduce the consumption to get it to the building's target, based on type.
Okay, thank you. That clarifies. Much appreciated.
Thanks.
Next question, is Commerce going to reevaluate the early adopter incentive awards already made for expanded allocation of funds, considering how much money is still available?
Yes, so do you mean, are we gonna look at those 7 applications that are already submitted and accepted?
I believe that's what they were referring to, yeah.
Yes, so I've had some informal conversations with the utilities that would be distributing those funds, and we are gonna have a more formal conversation, but as of right now, there has been nothing but green lights to go ahead and grandfather those already approved applications into whatever enhanced payment structure that we come up with.
Okay, thank you. And if anyone needs any clarifications, we encourage them to come off of mute and seek those. Next question, and this was from one of the polls responding other for poll 2. 15 EUI points is really deficient. What about buildings that are only 5 to 10 points off?
Unfortunately, that is the language that is in the bill. We know that that can be a limiting factor for applicants, but as of right now, unfortunately, that is what is in the statute.
We're talking about EUI again in the next one, but this one's more of a statement. The 15 points over target is excluding some clients who are interested but still need some help getting over the line. I don't if someone would like to pop off and maybe clarify a little bit.
I don't know if I answered that in the last one.
Yeah, sorry, I was muted. Yeah, basically the first comment and you answered that. It's just it's a high bar for some people to be that far out, and I have some clients that are really trying to get there, but they're only 11 points out, which is still a lot. They need a lot of funding to help get them there. So, but I get it. That's the way it's written.
Yeah, I mean, we can only hope that more funding comes our way in the coming months before these compliance deadlines to help, more private sector buildings and more buildings that aren't that far from their target. But yeah, right now it's that 15 points.
The next question came before Josette talked about the energy use intensity, so maybe that was answered with what Josette was speaking to. Also, what about buildings that are more than 15 points out? Will they get additional reward for meeting their target EUI?
Maybe. So that was part of why we wanted to have this conversation. Do we think we need to just bump everybody up a flat rate? Should we raise the bar for the flat rate and then give a higher incentive to those folks that have those huge gaps to close between their EUI and EUI target? We really would like your feedback on what your thoughts are. Obviously, keeping it within reason. Can we pay 100% of your costs? No, because that wouldn't leave any money for anybody else. But yeah, we really want some feedback on how to structure this enhanced incentive.
The next one is a bit more of a statement. The biggest issue we see with our clients is that the grant funds, if they succeed, will arrive in a completely different budget cycle. This upfront cost issue has stopped our clients from engaging.
Yeah, so, to shoulder some of that cost, obviously we launched this audit incentive program. And we know that this bill is holding people to a tall order. It is asking a lot. We're trying to incentivize, as much as we can. But that compliance cycle is coming. So
The next one, the risk of not getting funds is a big challenge. Awarding some funds upon completion of projects and additional funds after the performance period would make this much more attractive.
I started reading a chat that popped up. I'm sorry. Can you say that again?
Yeah, of course. The risk of not getting the funds is a big challenge. Awarding some funds upon completion of projects and additional funds after the performance period would make this much more attractive.
So are you saying if you do the whole benchmarking, get your application in, and then you're not able to meet your target, getting some sort of like partial incentive?
This is Justin. I was the one who submitted that comment. I think the thought being, if you could say, like, if we get 50% reserved, a lot of clients have hesitation. If I say I reduce my EUI 14 points, but not the full 15, I'm totally out of any incentives. So being able to do something like get 50% of the reserve funds upon proof that we've implemented the project, and then have the other portion of those funds be available as a performance piece.
Yeah.
So a year later, once we've shown the EUI reductions, then be able to get sort of the additional funds, assuming we prove the performance.
Yeah, so as the program is written right now, they do have to meet that target. What I would say is submit public comments, submit comments to us saying that, because that could potentially help future adaptations to this program or rulemaking going forward. But that does make a lot of sense. As of right now, unfortunately, it is, the incentive program, you do have to meet that target. But Monica, I see you coming off mute.
Sure. You answered that really well, Brittany, but I also just, I empathize with what you are saying, and I think those are really great ideas. Unfortunately, our hands are tied according to the RCW. So the RCW does state that we cannot authorize the release of incentive unless the building meets its applicable target. As Brittany mentioned, please do submit comments, reach out to your local legislator. Right now, Commerce cannot change the law, but I know that folks have really, really great ideas. And as this program is changing with the enhanced incentive, it doesn't, that's maybe something that can be explored in the next session.
Yeah, and that's where this audit incentive for public buildings came from. We got feedback that the audits were a big hurdle for public buildings. So yeah, it's probably not the answer you want to hear, but please reach out and submit that feedback for future changes. Eric?
Yeah, we have a few more comments. I think we were going over some barriers. The incentive barely makes a dent, and the overhead cost to implement the incentive nearly wipes out any benefit. Others spoke about the upfront audit cost as being difficult. I can see where this amount and the complexity in applying for it makes it less appealing than just going with the alternative investment criteria pathway.
So let me just jump in. So yeah, that is part of why we got that bill passed, is to be able to enhance that amount. I do realize it is still a very tall order to implement those project costs. But let's not forget, you will be seeing other savings down the road when your building is more energy efficient. I know that's not going to help anything with the upfront costs. It is expensive to get these buildings into compliance, but in the long run, they will be running more energy efficiently and saving you money down the road.
We had a few comments at this point just about some of the other incentives available from utility programs. So would encourage folks to research and reach out about those. We also had somebody mention the energy efficient commercial buildings deduction, the 179D. There was a link in the chat there, so we'll include that link as well in the materials we send out. Let's see, an additional incentive can be an automatic extension of the compliance deadline for approved EAI applicants, especially for the 2026 cohort of buildings.
Yeah, this, from what I've seen, as far as how you guys answered as your roles in this process, I'm sure you guys have a lot of great resources that you can share with your peers. So if you have any resources outside of commerce, feel free to share those in the chat with your peers. We definitely welcome that.
Another comment, providing access to financing to pay for the project costs would seem to be a better use of the state's resource than incentives, which only pay for a small portion of the project cost. I understand the state may not be able to use its credit, but it could help facilitate private sector funding or facilitate on-bill repayment through the utility.
Encourage public comments.
Yeah.
Get them
Um,
record.
Can audit incentives be used for internal staff?
Can you elaborate, whoever said that question? I mean, it's meant to pay for the cost of the audit and associated costs, life cycle cost analysis, the actual cost of the level 2 audit. So
I think they might have meant instead of hiring an external auditor, it's an internal staff. So
oh yeah, that's
therefore they
fine.
would
As
pay
long as
for.
as long as they meet the qualifications, then yeah, as long as they meet all the criteria and they're either on that DES list or they send in their credentials to us to get on our list.
There was a question around the audit incentives. Is that only available for public buildings greater than 220,000 square feet?
No, I know there's confusion. I was hoping that timeline would help, but tier 1 buildings have 3 cohort sizes. So the first deadline is for the 220,000 and larger. The next deadline is the 90 to 220. Am I getting those numbers right? I think for the second cohort, and then the third is the 50 to 90. All of those groups are tier 1 buildings. So if your building is essentially larger than 50,000 square feet and it's a public building, then yes, it would be, you'd be eligible to apply for the audit incentives.
I'm going to skip over some of the comments just to get to the questions. Why weren't nonprofits included in this additional incentive?
I was not here when it was drafted. I do not know. I will look to my peers to see if they, have any answers on why it was written the way that it was.
I'm not sure the why. However, in the future, we are working on more funding that are not for public buildings, but for more of the private sector. So more to come with fundings available. So stay tuned. Please subscribe to our bulletin and continue to participate in these conversations, and you'll hear about funding opportunities for those nonprofits.
Derek, can we go for about 2 more minutes with questions and then stop at 4:28 so I can go over the upcoming events?
Sounds good. Is the actual list of qualified auditors available yet? I'm having trouble finding it.
It's because it's not there yet. We just started getting applications in and, establishing the internal panel that is reviewing them. So more to follow. It will be posted on the incentive webpage and maybe even the Clean Buildings page, a link to that list.
And then what is the timeline plan to respond to submitted applications?
When I launched this program at the end of February, it was just me. There has been a lot of excitement and emails around this. My email inbox has exploded, and I have not been able to keep up. Now that we have Derek and Josette, we're going to be working towards, really getting through all those applications and emails asking questions about this. So, I don't have a timeline, but please be patient. We know that we have people we need to get back to, but there has been a lot of questions and a lot of information requests for this, which is great. We want to get the money out the door, but we're answering them in order. So you have not been forgotten if we haven't answered your email, and feel free to ping us again.
I'll do one last one. What happens if you cannot afford the costs of this program from start to finish, as well as on the ongoing requirements long term?
For compliance? Is that the question? Like, what if you cannot comply, or what if you can't meet your target in the incentive application process? Whoever asked that question.
Did this person want to come off of mute to clarify?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So I work with a school district. We've got 17 buildings and we're trying to figure out how to fund this. Not just the upfront part that we're talking about today, but all of the upgrades we'd have to make to our buildings. And we're just not sure what the consequences are if we don't hit our targets on time, and we're still working on how we would even fund it. So we're just really concerned about all those, and the timelines are coming down on us pretty fast, and we're trying to figure it out. We just don't know how we're going to make these goals or pay for any of it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously part of that is why we're here today, trying to promote the early adopter incentive program and the audit incentive program. And then the other pathway, obviously, of investment criteria. I see Annalyn coming off mute to maybe talk about.
Yeah, ultimately, in the end, if a school district isn't able to implement those energy efficiency measures because there's just no funding, the financial hardship exemption is, I would say, would be the way to go.
Can we go ahead and jump to the next slide?
Thank you.
Thank you, Annalyn. Real quick, before we got 1 minute left, I just want to jump to the next slide and talk about some of the upcoming stuff. So this is all focused around Tier 2. We're going to be launching these workshops starting June 13th of next month. Derek will be hosting these, and we're going to go into all the nitty gritty and, really get this program, get y'all's feedback, and launch this program in, I think, June of next year. So just a little briefing for Tier 2, that's buildings that are 20 to 50,000 square feet. They do not have to meet that performance criteria. The incentive funds are 30 cents per square feet, and there's $150 million in that pot. Outside of Tier 2 buildings, we are going to launch some more webinars soon about, like how to walk through that Tier 1 application, because we've heard today that that's difficult, and the audit incentive application. So more to follow. Please look at the website. Annalyn has done an amazing job making it beautiful. It's a great resource. And that's all I have. Thank you all so much. There's my information. Thank you. Thanks, Patrick.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.